The second half of 2.2 has two examples in it, and we're going to start with example 4. This time we're going to be dividing a fraction by a whole number. First, we're going to find 4/5 divided by 2. So we're going to start with the original problem again, which is 4/5 divided by 2, but we're also going to use this opportunity to put that whole number into an improper fraction. And remember, we do that by sticking it over a 1. So this is exactly the same as there, but 2 over 1 is going to be easier to work with for our next step. Just like we did in some of our previous examples, we're going to make sure that we keep the first number exactly the same, so it's still 4/5, and we're going to flip that division sign to a multiplication sign, and then at the same time, we're also going to flip that second number to its reciprocal. And since we had 2 over 1 as the second number there, when we flip it to its reciprocal, then it becomes 1/2. Remember to cross simplify if you can, and in this case we could look over here and we could see that 4 and 2 both have a common factor of 2. So if we divide by 2 here, we get 2. If we divide by 2 here, we get 1. And we rewrite those new fractions as 2/5 times 1 over 1. And then we just multiply like we have been all along. And so 2 times 1 is 2. 5 times 1 is 5. And since they're as low as they can go in that case, they don't have any other common factor besides 1, we know that's our final answer. This part is a little bit more of a reminder than anything, and it's a very helpful reminder for the order of operations, especially the way they have it set up here, because we talked about how after you get done with any parentheses and any exponents, that if you have any multiplication or division at all, you have to do it in order from left to right, whichever one happens to come up first. So if division comes up first in the left side, then you would do that before you multiply. But you still have to cover any multiplication or division before you can do any addition or subtraction that might be left. And of course, we talked about the only thing that would change that is if any of those operations were inside parentheses. But if you're not inside parentheses, then you do them in this order. And so the last things that you should be tackling would be any addition or subtraction. And again, you do them in order from left to right. So if subtraction comes up first and then the addition comes up, then you do the subtraction first. And that is something we practiced in chapter 1. But as I mentioned over here, you do not have to write this or draw this picture unless you need the reminder or unless you think it would be helpful to have this visual in your notes. But otherwise, you can go back to 1.3 and there should be some notes on order of operations if you find that helpful. For the last example of this chapter, example 5, we're going to be using order of operations, and we're going to evaluate 3/8 plus 5/6 divided by 5, and we're going to remember that evaluate just means to come up with your final answer. And for this one, the first thing I want us to notice is that we've got two operations. So we've got addition and division, and that means we're going to have to remember to tackle this division first. So when we start dealing with fractions, everything does take a little bit longer, takes a little bit more space, and so we're going to be really patient and we're going to worry about writing every step down and not worrying about how long it takes us or how many lines it takes us. And if you're just patient and you keep following the process, it will keep working for you. So as we do this, pay attention to the fact that it's going to be a little while we just work on this part of the problem, the 5/6 divided by 5. And then once we get done with those steps, then we'll come back around to this part. So for the first step, we're going to just rewrite that original problem, but we will take this opportunity to turn that whole number 5 into an improper fraction by putting it over 1. So for step 2, we're going to flip the division to a multiplication here, and we're going to flip the fraction right after that division to its reciprocal. And just to keep in mind, because that's the only part we're dealing with right now, we're going to leave the 3/8 and the plus alone. And remember, we're going to leave the 5/6 alone because any number before the division we always kept the same. But then we go ahead and we flip that division to the multiplication and flip that fraction right after it to the reciprocal, and the reciprocal of 5 over 1 is 1 over 5, or 1/5. After we've flipped that division sign to multiplication and flipped that final fraction to the reciprocal, we're still going to look to see if we can cross simplify. And in this case, since we have these two 5s diagonal to each other, we can divide out those 5s and make those into 1s. And remember, we're not even looking at this fraction here right now because it's not part of the division problem. It's all on its own. So we're going to keep it out of there for right now. And we're going to go ahead and just rewrite what that new fraction problem, or that new order of operations problem, is going to look like. So this is staying the same, and that next fraction is now 1 over 6 times, because we flipped that division sign to multiplication, 1 over 1 because we divided out that 5. The next step is simply to multiply those fractions that we were working with. So nothing is changing on the front end of this problem. 3/8 and plus are still there. 1 times 1 is 1, so we're going to put that on the top of the new fraction. And then 6 times 1 is 6, so that is going to go on the bottom. And so now we have a basic addition. But remember, with fractions, you do have to pay attention to the denominators when you're adding them, something we don't have to deal with when we're multiplying or dividing fractions. But in this case, we do have to have common denominators. So we're going to look for the least common denominator, or LCD, just like we did in the 1.6 extension. So again, if that's something that you're still struggling with, go back to the 1.6 extension video and notes to help yourself out. Alright, and since we happen to know that 8 and 6 can both go into 24, and that's actually the least common denominator, or LCD, we're going to go ahead and do that. And remember that you can never change one part of the fraction without changing the other. So in this case, if we're going to get 8 to go to 24, we know we're going to have to multiply that by 3. And so if I multiply the bottom of that fraction by 3, then I also have to multiply the top of it by 3. So my new fraction down here is going to be 9/24. And then over here, if I'm going to get 6 to go into 24, I'm going to have to multiply it by 4. And if I'm going to multiply that bottom by 4, then I have to do the numerator also. So my new fraction over here is going to be 4/24. And that finally brings us to our last step, where we get to just add. And again, when we're adding fractions, we only add our numerators. So 9 plus 4 is 13, and the 24 stays the same. And that's our final answer. We can check it, but 13 is prime, so only 1 and 13 go into it. And so the only common number it's going to have with 24 is 1, so we can't go any lower. But just a reminder that you might have to simplify again, especially if you did not find the actual LCD when you were doing common denominators before. If you found a common factor but it wasn't the least common factor, then you might have to do some more simplifying there at the end. And it's long, but be patient, and with enough practice this is going to work out just fine, because you're just going to keep following those steps. Alright, because I know this one is a little bit trickier with all the fractions and having to remember how to do order of operations correctly, we're going to do one more together before I have you try a couple on your own. So again, the first thing we have to notice in here is that we have two operations, and that division has to be done before we can do any addition. So we're going to just pay attention to this part of the problem, 2/5 divided by 4. And we're going to start by turning that 4 into a fraction, or an improper fraction, and then we'll take it from there. So we're going to rewrite that problem, 4/5 plus 2/5 divided by 4 over 1. And then we're going to keep going, and we're going to take a look at just the second part here, where the 2/5 is before the division, so it's going to stay the same, but we're going to flip that division to the multiplication sign and flip that 4 over 1 to the reciprocal, because that's the only way to divide by fractions, is to flip those two parts. And then we're going to go ahead and see if we can cross simplify. So again, remember, you're only paying attention to this part of the problem right now. And when we look across here, I can see that both of those numbers have a common factor of 2. So we're going to divide those out, and we're going to give ourselves new fractions here. So we've got 4/5 plus 1/5 now after we did that simplifying times 1/2 again after the simplifying. And we're going to go ahead and just multiply those together. So 4/5 is staying the same, nothing to do just yet with that. And then 1 times 1 is 1, 5 times 2 is 10. And now we've got it to the two fractions that we can deal with, and luckily they picked ones that we should be able to do pretty easily with the common denominators. So let's make them both out of 10. And that way we can keep this one the same. Nothing's going to change there. This one, we're going to have to multiply 5 by 2 to get 10. So that means we're going to have to multiply 4 by 2, and that should give us 8. And then when we add those across, we should get 9/10. And that can't go any lower. So our final answer on that one should be 9/10. For the two on your own problems, I'm going to encourage you to really watch your signs carefully because there are a few things that are a little bit different than the practice problems that we've been doing so far. So here you might notice that you've got a division and a subtraction this time, and hopefully you'll notice that the division comes first. So you'll have to deal with that. And then over here there are two divisions, and you have to go in order from left to right on that one. So those are your two hints before you try them on your own. And then once you try them, check your answers and remember to go back and rework them if you get anything wrong, because it's just going to take a little practice on these.